everyone, and welcome back to Classic Vinyl Podcast. I'm your host, Justin, and I've got here beside me my co-host, Tyler.
My name is Tyler.
Got you here once again.
I am back.
So tonight, or today, or this morning, or whenever you're listening, we are going to review, for the 60th anniversary of its release, the Beatles' first UK album, Please Please Me.
So thank you for letting us into your ears.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange thing because the Beatles' whole line of UK albums, the way they intended them to be, were not released that way here in the States. Well, at least their first 7 albums were released differently up until Sgt. Pepper's, and so over here we got different Capitol albums by the Beatles. But this is the day, March 22nd, of 1963, so the 60th anniversary of the release of this album, which kicked off the Fab Four. Of course, they released it in the UK. We didn't get the album here until 1987 on compact disc.
Dang.
But anyways, let me give a little history on the Beatles if people don't already know. But they're a small band formed in Liverpool in 1960.
The Four Lads from Liverpool.
Yeah, you've heard of them.
Yeah.
They are regarded, really, as the most influential band of all time. Whether you agree with that or not...
Go ahead and argue against it.
You can argue against it, but they definitely have been influential. So, they did have 20 number one hits in the U.S., 27 number one hits total in the U.S. and UK. And the funny thing is, they probably would have had about double that amount if their own songs wouldn't have kept their other songs off the top of the charts.
Yeah, show me another band that has that problem.
Yeah. So, best-selling band of all time with over 180 million worldwide sales in albums. So, obviously the Fab Four made of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr. They did not start that way. They had a few other band members, but, we don't want to go into the complete history. But John Lennon basically started the band as the quarryman. Paul McCartney soon brought along George Harrison. And they found Pete Best was their drummer up until basically the recording of this album, when he was replaced by the best drummer in Liverpool, Ringo Starr, Mr. Richard Starkey.
So why'd they replace Pete Best?
Well, basically, George Martin, when they brought him in, and we were going to get into this, but since you want to go into it early.
Okay.
They brought him in. George Martin, the producer, didn't really like Pete Best. And it was quite common at the time for them to bring in session musicians, especially session drummers. And so he brought in a session drummer, Andy White. But unbeknownst to him, once he, showed his displeasure for Pete Best drumming, the Beatles immediately, with all their kind-hearted how they were at that time in their lives, decided to fire him and hire Richard Starkey, Ringo Starr.
That makes sense.
And so, kind of interesting there. But, the Beatles, the name the Beatles, spelled B-E-A-T, is in beat. Music is kind of a play on words from, like, Buddy Holly and the Crickets.
Sure.
Because Buddy Holly and the Crickets, were also another animal, or well, not animal, but bug that made sound, right?
Yeah.
So, but they had a manager, famously Brian Epstein, that pretty much brought them into the forefront of everything. Put them in the suits and the boots and the haircuts they were well known for, and they cut their teeth playing in Hamburg, Germany, and the Cavern Club in Liverpool. And like I said, they had. The album situation was a mess worldwide. The albums they recorded and, produced, put down in the UK were released differently, especially in the US, and it's confusing. So a lot of people, especially that grew up in this time, do not know Please Please Me because it did not come out that way. So, it's kind of interesting, but it kind of makes for a different... I kind of enjoy it because it's kind of fun to see the different way they've arranged the albums and things. I've got a cool little chart that kind of shows the original albums on one side and it shows like a flow chart of what albums those songs went to on the other side in the US. It's kind of interesting, but
potato,
exactly.
and
But it's
schedule and
But I am, the funny thing is I grew up with the UK releases because, in 1987 they re-released them all on compact disc.
Oh,
correctly.
okay.
Correctly as they meant, and that's what I'm used to. So I'm not really used to the U.S. releases, but any of our, anyone that lived through Beatlemania and when they invaded the U.S., so to say, they'll be used to the U.S. albums, and they are quite a bit different. I like listening to albums in the order they're supposed to go. I don't do a lot of playlists and things like that. I like listening to albums, and so I'm sure a lot of people were like that, and it's kind of weird to go to the original UK album. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that still prefer the US albums. So
yeah. Do you also eat your vegetable soup in in alphabetical order with the
I don't eat any soup.
Alphabet soup?
Not alphabet soup.
Okay.
I won't do it.
Because I was curious.
No. So anyways,
Okay.
the Beatles hit it big in the US, obviously, with I Want to Hold Your Hand. They released it in December of 63, and by mid-January it was number one, and that kind of set up their invading of the U.S., right? February 7th, 1964 is when they arrived in New York to 3,000 screaming fans, which kind of kicked off Beatlemania here in the U.S., right?
Yeah, the world had not really seen a phenomenon like this.
No, it was an interesting thing, coming off the Kennedy assassination and stuff. I think it was a good thing for the nation to heal.
Yeah.
It was a good thing this coming. And I'm sure to a lot of people, especially old timers, it was looked at as a flash in the pan, the same way we look at certain things today, now that we're the old timers, right?
Yeah.
But I think the Beatles definitely proved most people wrong in that aspect.
For sure. And the Beatles, let's see. Let me organize my thoughts here for a second. But the relationship that we've had between the United States and Great Britain has been that the United States is more boisterous and outspoken and loud, and the British have always been more reserved and more quiet and peaceful, right? Calm.
Yeah.
So the phenomenon of British Beatlemania is this is just a really insane thing where you get that mix of the United States being so loud and boisterous, and the Beatles just ate it up.
Oh yeah, and it was 2 days after they arrived in New York. They played the Ed Sullivan Show, famously to 73 million people, and I don't know if you know, but that's 1/3 of the U.S. population at the time. There is nothing nowadays that gets that kind of. I mean, even the Super Bowl, I think, gets 70 million worldwide, and we're talking in a
New
world
Year's Eve. I mean, what? Yeah, the Macy's parade, anything.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, nobody watches that, and that's just U.S. viewers, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the Beatles went on to do several movies like Hard Day's Night and Help and Magical Mystery Tour and Get Back. And they famously, they toured all over. Played really short concerts where they couldn't hear themselves and nobody could hear them because of all the screaming. But August 29th, 1966, they played their last concert, and it was at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. And, a lot of people were sad. I don't think they really announced they were going to quit touring, but I'm happy they did, because that's when they ended that phase and went into the studio phase where they spent so much time creating these albums. They had just got done recording Revolver, and then they went full on in the studio with Sgt. Pepper's, and I think if they were still touring, it would have made it hard for them to create these masterpieces.
It's really hard when you're getting death threats, because there was plenty of that going around too.
Yeah, I mean, the whole John Lennon thing where he had said, they were more popular than Jesus Christ, which I think they probably were in some aspects, at least to the children, right?
For sure.
And a lot of other things, gone on. I think they didn't feel like their music was improving, playing, and so it was what it was. But And one other thing I left out, George Martin, their producer, I mean, very, very key from the very beginning, actually played on a lot of the songs they had and had a lot of direction to what they did. And so there's a lot of argument to who the fifth Beatle is. It's always been an argument, and I would consider George Martin, without a doubt, the fifth Beatle.
Over Pete Best?
Yes, I think. Okay. Pete's done well. He's been able to write books and do media tours and things, so he's done well.
Yeah. Great story that he gets to tell about this. But, I think we're all the better for the Beatles having Ringo Starr.
I agree. I think he just fit in a lot better. So, the Beatles in 7 years made 13 studio albums, which is unheard of nowadays.
Yeah.
Most people in 7 years barely get a couple albums out. So the amount of material they cranked out, not to mention how groundbreaking most of the material was, is just crazy, and most of that due to the Lennon and McCartney writing duo. Obviously Harrison, his writing came in very strong towards the end of the Beatles' tenure, so, which was, very popular.
Yeah.
And all four Beatles have been inducted in the Hall of Fame as Beatles and as solo acts. They've all four of them had very, very good solo careers, Paul McCartney, he's, done 26 studio albums, 7 of them with Wings, 3 with a band he formed more recently called The Firemen. He's had almost 50 million in total album sales as a solo act. John Lennon, 23 million album sales as a solo act, and that's 11 studio albums. And obviously he was killed in December of 1980, or he'd probably have more.
Yeah.
George Harrison has released 12 studio albums. He has over 10 million worldwide sales on albums, and of course George died in December 2001 at the age of 58. So, and then Ringo, he's actually recorded 20 studio albums and has a couple million in sales on those. He's done really well for the drummer of the Beatles.
Yeah, not bad for a drummer, I was going to say.
And so, that's kind of an overview of the Beatles. We're not going to go in depth on them because anyone that knows the Beatles knows we could spend hours and hours and hours just on a month of their history.
Yeah, you're not going to get anything new about the Beatles, any of you Beatles fans out there.
No, and I'm one of the biggest Beatles fans there are. I listen to a lot of the Beatles podcasts. In fact, you really need to go check out Nothing Is Real. It's an excellent Beatles podcast that deep dives into all kinds of subjects. And so if you really want to learn
something new, there you go.
Yeah, you'll know what they had for dinner on a certain date. So that's Nothing Is Real podcast is an excellent podcast if you want to learn about the Beatles, and there are others out there as well. Let's get to the album. So Please Please Me. It was released on this day, March 22nd in 1963, so 60 years.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, and of course that's only in the UK. The Beatles had signed with EMI Records in May of 1962, and they recorded the bulk of Please Please Me in September of 62.
Okay.
It was just like all those things, it was recorded fairly quickly. In fact, George Martin actually wanted to record the album as a live album. They initially wanted to record it at the Cavern, but I guess George Martin visited one of their concerts there where they played quite frequently, and the acoustics weren't good in there, and so they just finally opted for a studio album.
All right.
But when this album was released, it in the UK, it stayed in the top 10 for over a year. And the funny thing is, 30 weeks at the top of the charts, right?
Yeah.
And guess what replaced it? Their second album. So, like you said, some of their records and things are, and I don't mean the vinyl, I mean the records they own as far as chart toppers and things like that.
Yeah.
They've almost, because of the frequency they release singles and albums, they knocked their own selves off of the charts. So it would have been interesting to see how long some of those things would have held if, it would have been a normal circumstance.
Well, yeah, show me any song nowadays that's 30 weeks at the top of the charts, only to be bumped out by another album from that same artist.
Yeah, and that happened with their singles all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So, in the U.S., Capitol Records was EMI's U.S. branch,
Okay.
and they really didn't bite on the Beatles. They didn't want to really have much to do with them, but they did get VJ Records to bite on them, and they released an album that same year, but it was a little bit different because it only had 12 songs instead of 14 because that was kind of the more common thing in America. American labels like to have no more than 12 songs. They didn't put Please Please Me on, which was the title track, and they didn't
Surprising.
and they didn't put Ask Me Why.
Huh.
Now they did release it later as a second version and did include those songs on and kicked a couple other songs off.
Oh, I see.
So VJ Records, kind of an interesting album.
Yeah.
So, Rolling Stone, which we do refer to sometimes on there, rated Please Please Me as the 39th best album of the top 500. And they ranked it as number 17 best debut albums of all time. I take a little, I kind of disagree with that.
Okay.
I honestly don't think it should be as high on the top 500 albums of all time. But I think as far as debut, I guess it depends on whether you're ranking it for
What's the metrics, right?
well, yeah, is it the content of the music or is it the impact it had?
Yeah. Are we going by the number of sales? Or are we going by, what is it?
Well, in the impact, you realize this kicked off everything as far as the British invasion, which, whether you like the Beatles or not, you look at your other bands, there's a ton of them. I mean, we talk The Who, The Kinks, The Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, all these bands that kind of stemmed out of this, and I really don't think you'd have them, or at least have them in the same capacity without the Beatles.
For sure.
And so, kind of interesting, but anyways, Please Please Me, produced by George Martin. And like we said earlier, he didn't like Pete Best's drumming. He wanted a session drummer instead, so he hired Andy White. Of course, as soon as the band knew George Martin didn't want Pete Best, I think it's kind of written
Just
in
out of spite, they said, we don't want Andy White? Or was it racism?
No,
Okay.
no racism. No, I think, the Beatles historically didn't really do a lot with Pete Best, and he didn't seem to fit in with the band as well. At least that's the way it's been written in a number of books. And I think as soon as they, they're on this verge of an album and all this stuff, and they're hearing that, the record producer doesn't want this drummer, they're like, well, okay, we're getting rid of him. We're going to get Richard Starkey, He was from one of the real famous bands in Liverpool, Rory Storm. And he was kind of considered the best drummer in Liverpool, and he had filled in for the Beatles. The Beatles knew him well, and he hopped right on over. So,
well, and something I really like about Ringo Starr is that he's got this real mellow personality, so easygoing that he just he's everybody's buddy,
I think he was, in a lot of ways, especially when you get into the later tumultuous years of the Beatles, he was somewhat of a glue that held a lot of them together.
Yeah.
Because, even after the Beatles split and stuff, he was kind of...
He was the common ground, right?
He really was between everyone, So, the funny thing is, though, their first single they released, Love Me Do, the single is Ringo. If you hear the single, you can tell it's Ringo because it doesn't have tambourine in it. But the Love Me Do that makes it to this album was actually recorded with the session drummer, Andy White.
Oh.
And if you want to hear the very first time they recorded it with Pete Best, that's actually on the Anthology 1 version. So, and they are different, and in my opinion, listening to all of them back to back to back, Ringo stands out substantially, even more so than the session drummer, Andy White.
Ringo just seems like he flows real well. He meshes well with as a drummer, as a singer, as a Beatle.
Well, I think, as a Beatle, definitely. I think Ringo is a very underrated drummer. He's not, we talk about Keith Moon a lot. He is no big Phil guy or whatever like that, but if you really sit down and listen to his drumming, he's perfect at keeping rhythm, and he does a lot of things that other drummers couldn't do, and I think he's very, very undervalued as a drummer.
Sure.
And I think most, Beatles fans especially know that. And people that really know music know how undervalued he is, because he's a lot better than truly what people give him credit for. So this album reached number 1 in the UK. It did reach number 2 in the US in 1987 when they did finally release the UK versions on CD.
Wow.
But obviously this album was not released as it is, in the US because of Capitol Records, basically, So it's kind of interesting when we look at the cover of the album. You've got a picture of the band looking down over the stairwell at EMI Studios, or the EMI headquarters, in London.
Yeah.
And kind of an interesting fact about that is they recreated the shot in later years. It was going to be on the Get Back album, which ended up being the Let It Be album, but they were going to do it just kind of referencing back to their old, the old times, but it never made it because, well, if anybody knows the history of the Let It Be album, it didn't play out the way it was going to. And in the late 70s, when they released the 2 double albums, the Red and Blue Greatest Hits, they took the shot off of Please Please Me for the early Red album, Greatest Hits, and then the later one of them as they're older for the Blue Greatest Hits. So it's kind of neat to look at them back to back because they're standing in the same place, but of course in the later one they've got beards and different hair, and they've aged a little bit, and it almost seems worlds apart instead of just 6 years apart. It's kind of crazy, but so anyways, when the first US album was released on Capitol, not VJ, it was released as the early Beatles, or not the first album, when these songs made their first release in the US, it was released on an album called The Early Beatles. It was released on March 22nd of 65.
Oh.
So actually 2 years after this was released in
England.
And it was pretty much the same, just a little bit different song arrangements. So, and when Please Please Me was released in the UK, it was released in mono first, and the stereo version was released just a month later.
Oh, okay.
So, and they released 2 singles off this album, Love Me Do and Please Please Me, the title track. So that's kind of the basics of the album. Let's get into it right now on side 1. So first song kicks off, I Saw Her Standing There.
She was just 17.
Yeah, which was the original name of the song.
Oh.
Was called 17, which nowadays that'd get you in some kind of trouble.
Statutory.
Yes, exactly. But, this is a Lennon and McCartney song, but mainly written by McCartney. I don't know what to say about this song. This is a great song. It has an amazing intro. It kicks right into it, and you have to put yourself into the shoes and the time and what this song was, because this is a very upbeat rockin' song.
Yeah. Let's see. This is sung by Paul McCartney?
Yes.
And he also plays the bass, right?
He does. It's got excellent bass work in this.
That's one thing I noticed about this song is excellent bass line.
Yeah, the bass line. And, just like Ringo being undervalued as a drummer, Paul McCartney is very undervalued as a bass player. You get into some of the later years stuff, and he lays down some amazing bass lines. But I think where the Beatles weren't straight ahead rock and roll, they have such a variety of songs. I think maybe that's overlooked a bit, but Paul McCartney, an excellent musician.
And John Lennon's doing the backup singing, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and he's got a good supporting voice.
He does. Well, and that goes into what you're going to see for years and years from the Beatles is the harmonies between Lennon and McCartney, and Harrison at sometimes, but especially the harmonies between Lennon and McCartney. Their voices mesh so well together.
Yeah.
Paul generally sings on the higher end with, John down a couple octaves on it, but they mesh so well. The chorus in this with Lennon is great. But, from the intro to the bass work to just the fast-moving song, this song's a classic. I love this song.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I wrote down in this is, as Paul McCartney's just, belting it out, I wrote, Let It All Hang Out, Paul. Because it's it's a great dancing song.
Well, yeah, and you got to realize this is 1963, right? I mean, this...
Yeah.
I think some of these early songs don't hold up as well until you put yourself in the context. But when you sit down and really listen to them, it's amazing what they were doing, you know?
Yeah. When I think of this song, I think about, a malt shop from the 1950s. Just a bunch of kids, having a great time, putting on some rock and roll music on the jukebox and dancing.
Don't you think it's a little more risque than the 50s, though? I mean, because
that's just it. Is when I think about it in my mind, that's what I think. But then when I listen to it, it is more risque.
I mean, it's kind of, for the time, 60s. It's kind of a heavy song.
It is.
And, this was the B-side to I Want to Hold Your Hand. I Want to Hold Your Hand topped the charts for 7 weeks until it was knocked off by another one of their songs. And this reached number 14. Speaking of Rolling Stone, they ranked this as 139th of their top 500 songs of all time. And I think this song holds a special place for me because this is the lead-off song to the lead-off Beatles album. And of course that's me being based on the UK albums, which is how they meant them to be, right? Yeah. The US releases had nothing to do with the way the Beatles meant them to be released, but as an American in those times, that's the way you know them, right? And you're going to get used to listening to them that way. But this song is a 10 out of 10 for me. It's an awesome rocker. Got an amazing bass line, like we said, and Paul just belts it out, and it's quintessential early Beatles song. A good rocker. I think this was the perfect song to open the album with.
Yeah, something that I noticed about the songs on this album is that they all seem to go real fast, and it seems like they're over quicker than you expect them to be.
Well, I think, at the time, like I said, US only wanted 12 songs per album. It was a little more common to put 13 or 14 on a British album, but songs were, you didn't have your epic 5 to 7 to 8 minute masterpieces, you're talking 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what it was, especially if they were as to be meant for radio play or singles, and I think to keep people's attention. The one thing about this album, as you'll see, obviously, I Saw Her Standing There was written by Lennon and McCartney. It's mainly McCartney's song, and that's how Lennon and McCartney did a lot of it. One of them would come in with an idea, and they'd get with the other one and expound off of it, So, but a lot of the songs on this album are written by them, which wasn't very common at the time either. If you go look at the Stones were releasing albums pretty much of straight cover versions, or songs other people had written for them. So it was kind of strange for a songwriting duo to play instruments and sing and perform the songs that they had written, so that was another thing that made the Beatles what they were. So we move on to song 2, Misery. Another song written by Lennon and McCartney. This is sang by Lennon mainly, but he's got McCartney on a lot of it with him.
Yeah, they switch places on this.
Yeah, a lot of harmonies again in this, and you're kind of seeing into what the Beatles are going to be because they are well known for those harmonies, right?
Yeah.
Couple facts about this song. This is actually the first song that was ever covered by... This is the first Beatles song, written by some of the Beatles that were covered by someone else.
Oh, really?
It was covered by Kenny Lynch.
Oh.
I've never heard that version of it. So, but the Beatles originally wrote this song for a famous British singer named Helen Shapiro. They had toured with her and stuff, and they had written this song for her, but it somehow didn't work out that way, right? And another thing is George Martin, their producer, he does play piano on this song with them.
He's a good pianist.
He is.
It's really good piano, yeah.
Yeah, he's an excellent musician all the way around, and that's why I say he's definitely the fifth Beatle, because if not for him and Brian Epstein, I'm sure the Beatles' talent would have shown through to a certain degree, but I don't know what degree it would have. Who knows?
Yeah.
You can't really say at this point, but what do you think of this song?
It's really a catchy song. It's kind of interesting to hear the music that the Beatles play with these songs, because sometimes the music seems happy, but the message of it is just misery. Misery. It's I think the first line is the world is treating me bad. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what the song's about. Is just living in misery. But there is kind of a
I'm the kind of guy that never used to cry.
Yeah, there's a melancholy about it as well. So I mean, as upbeat as it seems,
it's kind of a mid-tempo song. Tempo. It's not it's not slow, but it's not fast like I saw her standing there, right?
Exactly. So it moves quickly, but it's not super fast. But it still has that melancholy. So
yeah,
I liked it. I've heard this song before, and it's a good song.
It's an excellent song, and that's another good thing though is if you look at how the Beatles bounce off these songs, a lot of albums you'll go listen to sound pretty similar throughout, similar structure, instrumentation. The instrumentation and everything sounds real similar. Yeah. The Beatles don't. They have a weird way of going from a rocker to just a weird ballad to songs we'll talk about we get later in this album that are just like way out of bounds, for what's the norm, but they somehow make it work, Yeah,
they're kind of trendsetters.
Yeah. So we go to the next song, and it's actually a cover, a song called Anna, Go to Him. Yeah. It was written by Arthur Alexander. Mm-hmm. Now this song, it's a slower song. Yeah. This one's sang by John Lennon, and famously he had a horrible cold when he sang this, and I can tell in his... Or at least I think I can tell. Maybe it's just because I know.
His voice does sound like he's, a little more husky than normal?
Strained a tiny bit and a little husky. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm just reading into that because I know famously it's been written a number of times that he was super sick. But, this is another song.
And yet it's on the album. I mean...
Well, they just want to lay these things down, right? We don't have time to wait for you to get better. Yeah. Get your ass in here and sing the song.
This song was new to me. I don't think I'd heard this one before.
Well, yeah, and you're certainly not the deep dive Beatles fan that I am. I mean, all the radio play songs and some of the others, but this is a good song. It's kind of funny, Anna, Go to Him, and obviously this isn't written by the Beatles, so it's hard to say, but it's almost like I want to get rid of you type of song.
I look at this song as being a very mature approach to relationships. So the singer of this song is more in love with Anna, but Anna's kind of two-timing him, and there's another guy in her life, and if she likes him better than the singer of this song, so let's say John Lennon, then John Lennon's telling her, hey, if you want to be with him, give me my ring back and go to him. And it's kind of like, ouch.
Yeah, and I guess to me, I don't know why, but this is another song that shouldn't work with the Beatles.
Yeah.
It's kind of strange in that weird way, but it's a good song.
It's a good song, but it's not your typical Beatles.
Yeah, it isn't. But the funny thing is throughout history, I don't know if there is a typical Beatles. I don't know if it was Paul or John that somebody said, "What's your formula for writing a song?" And I'm probably blowing this up and ruining it, but it was something of this nature that well, if we knew what the formula was, we wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because they wanted every song to be its own and stand on its own. And that's why the Beatles aren't, you can call them a rock band because they had rock songs. You can call them a pop band because they had pop songs. They had surreal songs. They had, just everything in between, storytelling songs. And
on this album, there's, your stereotypical lovey-dovey love song.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, basically. Mm-hmm. So this brings us to the next song, Chains.
This was another new one to me.
Yeah, and this one's a song written by Jerry Goffin and Carole King. They were married at the time. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Carole King famously, did the Tapestry album and had a lot of hits, mid-70s, early to mid-70s and things.
Yeah.
But this was before. This is when she was just writing with her husband. And so this is a song she wrote way before... anybody even knew who she was. This song's got a good harmonica intro to it.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of bluesy.
Yeah, it's kind of bluesy. this song's actually the first recorded song sang by George Harrison.
Yeah. Something I noticed about this, with George Harrison singing, George Harrison sounds like John Lennon with a cold.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never really thought about that.
And, there's another George Harrison song on this album that I noticed the same thing. He sounded like John Lennon with a cold.
Well, and I really think, George Harrison, he had sang quite a bit on live with them as they were playing the places, but his vocals, especially on the 2 songs on this album, are a little weaker than the rest. And I just don't think he was...
He's got a little rougher, a little deeper voice than John.
Yeah, but I don't think he was quite polished yet either.
No.
I'm used to it, especially during the recording. But he was also quite young, too, the youngest Beatles. So, but this got a good harmonic intro. We'd have to ask Jerry and Carol what they wrote it about, but it really sounds like it's a man that
wants to go do some running around.
Yeah, but he can't because he's whipped.
Yeah,
right.
He's already committed to this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
He is whipped.
That's just kind of what it sounds like. Now, this song is not my favorite on the album, but it's a good way, I think, to get George in there, and I like the way the Beatles, all 4 Beatles sing on this album, and I think that's another thing that actually stands him apart, because a casual Beatles fan probably can't tell who's singing, and me and you play those games too, right?
Sure.
Just... Tell me who's singing, Tyler.
Because honestly, I am I'm a novice when it comes to the Beatles, so I'm getting used to them, but I'm not by any means like just automatically know who's singing. So yeah, a lot of times I'm guessing when it comes to who's singing.
Yeah, and it's funny. I guess I don't understand because I can tell right off the bat, but I'm so used to it. So,
but I'll tell you one thing I can know for sure is I can tell that they sound like the Beatles.
Yeah,
yeah. As much as they have a different range and scope, I can tell like if Ringo, he's one of the Beatles. John, he's one of the Beatles. George, one of the Beatles. Yep.
Well, at least you're on the right band.
And Paul, he's usually
a Beatle.
Well, he's usually singing anyway, so.
True.
Yeah.
So, not a bad song, kind of album filler as far as I'm concerned. We could go either way on that, but it's not a Beatles song either. So,
no.
The next song also is a cover, Boys, written by Luther Dixon and Wes Farrell, and this is Ringo's contribution to singing on this album.
Yeah, and he's a really good singer.
He's not bad on this.
He's got a good voice.
It's not bad on this song. Now, the Beatles, this was always the drummer's song, I guess, playing live. Pete Best always sang this song as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it was just the drummer's song. It's a good little blues rocker.
Yeah.
Nothing
this
special.
was another one new to me. I think the rest of most of the songs on this first side were new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, it's funny because most Beatles fans, and this is the way I kind of transitioned, was I got into their later stuff first, Hey Jude, Let It Be, Get Back, those kind of things. And I found my way backwards because I wasn't born yet when the Beatles, first hit. So, I'm on the second side of things, but it's easier to me to get into their later stuff because it's more commercially... I think it's aged better is probably the way to put it, because of the production value and things like that. But
yeah.
I really enjoy going to these early albums that are just straight rockers and kind of an indication of the times. And it kind of shows you, if you really put yourself in the mind, that this was different. You know what I mean? This was something people hadn't done.
Yeah, this Boys is kind of a hard rock song. It's not heavy metal, but it's hard rock.
Yeah, it's just straight. And... straight rock, and it's a good song. It's in, I think it's a good one for Ringo to sing because he doesn't have to go out of some kind of special vocal ability to hit a bunch of highs and lows. It's pretty straightforward, and it's not a bad song.
You were saying when we were listening to this that they were going to, or that they recommended they change it to girls instead of boys.
Yeah, they thought, I guess they thought, by singing it as boys, and all the connotation in it about boys that it would take on some kind of homosexual meaning.
I guess I could see that, but I could see that just if you're not paying attention to what he's singing.
Yeah, and
It's almost like a boys will be boys kind of song. This is how boys are.
that's the way I've always taken
Yeah.
it. Until I read that, I didn't think of it any other way, right?
No, and
So-
girls. Well, that's all we really want is girls. That's a song that came later.
Yeah,
And it
so,
wasn't the Beatles.
I don't know. I mean, famously, the Beatles said, we don't care what people think. We're going to sing the song how it is, and I think it turned out to be a good number. I think it's a good contribution by Ringo on here, and I think it's it's kind of amazing that he's just barely joined the band, and they're throwing him into singing a song, right?
Yeah, right off the bat.
Yeah, good song.
He did good.
Yeah, good song, and I think he still plays it live with Ringo Starr and the All-Star Band,
He should.
which I'm going to go see this July, I believe.
Hey, good for you.
I can't remember if it's June or July, but I'm going to see him again.
Yeah.
Actually, not again. I've never seen Ringo Starr and the All-Star Band.
Well, I hope that you enjoy him.
I'm going to try.
And I hope he'll enjoy you.
Probably about my last chance, isn't it?
He's getting up there.
Yeah. So, next song, Ask Me Why. So, this is another Lennon and McCartney composition. Mainly Lennon's song. He sings on it for the most part. He's the main vocalist, but there's a lot of good dual harmonies with McCartney on this one.
Yes, there are.
This song was actually the B-side of the Please Please Me single.
Okay.
And funny enough, it was originally one of the songs they actually did place or record with Pete Best.
Oh.
That turned George Martin off to it, and no one's been able to find that version. It apparently was scrapped, and George Martin wasn't happy with it, and it's when he decided to tell him that, hey, we need a session drummer on this, And so anyway...
So George Martin basically went into the studio and grabbed the reels and set fire to them while stomping up and down on them.
Something like that.
And Pete Best looked on with horror.
Would have been a tiny bit smarter for him to keep it for a release, but no one ever would have thought about those things at the time. And this was one of the songs.
George Martin was just trying to build a band, right?
He's trying to build a band. This was one of the songs that wasn't on that VJ release introducing the Beatles. This and Please Please Me, but on version 2, they removed Love Me Do and put this on there.
Oh, okay.
So, kind of interesting, but...
Yeah, I don't know that I can agree with that decision.
Well,
Not a bad song, but I think that Love Me Do and Please Please Me are better songs.
Well, without a doubt.
Yeah.
This is a good song. I would say the things that are best for this, it's, another one of the album filler songs, but it's a good song to have. The dual harmonies between Lennon and McCartney kind of foreshadowing what's to come and how well their vocals work together, I think is probably the most important thing on this one.
Yeah. Let's see. There was a little bit of a callback to Misery in this song. Very analytical song about the reasons for having affection.
Yeah, and they took a different approach to those kind of things. Their love songs were not so... I guess you hit that on the head. They're more analytical than straightforward in some ways,
Yeah.
Speaking of straightforward, we get to the next song, Please Please Me.
Yeah, this is pretty dang straightforward.
Yeah, and this is another Lennon-McCartney song, mainly Lennon's song. He said he had, used this because of kind of a Roy Orbison take on things, and it's sang by Lennon for the most part. This song, when it was released as a single, reached number 2 in the UK and number 3 in the US.
Wow.
And now, in the US, though, it was originally released with Ask Me Why as the B-side, and it didn't do well. But when they re-released it in January of '64 with their other new song, From Me to You as the B-side, that's when it hit number 3. And most of that was in reaction to I Want to Hold Your Hand, because I Want to Hold Your Hand had boomed up on the charts. And so at that point, once I Want to Hold Your Hand in January '64 hit and went straight to number 1, they just started pushing these songs out, and they were going to I mean, people were going to buy them at that point because it was such a phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
So, and that kind of shows, it can't even hit the top 100, and then 2 months later it's released again, and it, hits number 3. Kind of
surprising.
Kind of crazy.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, so this got good Lennon harmonica in it.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the bass track in this. It's an excellent bass track laid down, especially for such an early song.
Mm-hmm. It seems like it's got a really upbeat tune or upbeat music for the tone of the message of the song.
Well, yeah, and it was originally a pretty slow song. It was slowed down quite a bit, and George Martin, the producer, didn't like it, and he just didn't like it at all, and he asked them to try speeding up the tempo, and they did speed up the tempo, and all of them enjoyed the song much better. And as soon as they recorded it, George Martin told them, "Hey, this is your first number 1 hit."
That's that's the vision that George Martin had. So good on him for recognizing it. I'd still be very curious to see if they have any recordings of the original tempo that was slowed down to match more of the message of the song.
Yeah, and I can see how. I mean, you look at it. Obviously, it's easy to look back in perspective, but slowed down, I don't think it would do very well.
It probably wouldn't. I would just be really curious to see what it originally sounded like.
Well, I'm one that's always said, how there's some bands that have released 2 versions of songs, and the Beatles famously did it too. I mean, you go forward with say Revolution. They released that in different versions, and they've got the slow version on the White Album, and then they released the fast, upbeat, rocking version as a single, and I love the fast, upbeat, rocking version. So my thought's always, especially when a band, obviously at this point in their careers, they couldn't just flood the gates with everything, but I like when a band says, God, we have this slow, and then we got this other version. I'd be happy if certain bands release 4 versions of the damn song, then I could choose which one I like the best.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, I like this song. It's a good song. I just thought it was, listening to the lyrics, because this is, the message of this is a guy that's very frustrated in a one-sided relationship. He's giving his all to please his girl, and he has a chat with her like, hey, why won't you please me in return the way I've been trying to please you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was their second single released in the UK after Love Me Do, and it was actually the first single released in the US. And of course, that first time it was released, it didn't do well.
Yeah.
So they re-released it, but very pivotal song, I think, in their career. Rolling Stone does rank this 184th out of 500 songs, and I'd probably tend to agree with that to a certain sense. Sure. I think it's more pivotal in the meaning of the song than in how good the song is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Being their first single to release, and
this is a landmark song for the Beatles.
It is, and with the harmonic in it, it's got a good bass line. It pretty much defines what the Beatles were in these early years, and all these singles they released at first were very strong for them, right?
Yeah.
And it's what set the plate for what was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what ignited Beatlemania.
Yeah. So Please Please Me, obviously the title track, that closes out side 1. So if we flip the vinyl over to side 2, we open up with Love Me Do. Obviously this was their first single.
Yeah.
B-side of this was P.S. I Love You.
Yeah.
When they released it. It's another Lennon and McCartney song, mainly written by McCartney. One thing I like about this is open up with a harmonica intro, and it actually opens with the chorus in harmony from Lennon and McCartney. And you don't see a lot of songs just open with a chorus, and I really like how they've done that and in harmony.
This song was a conundrum listening to it, because this is really a harmonica and a drum song. Those are the 2 big instruments. The bass is keeping the tempo and the rhythm in the background.
Yeah, but the bass is very diluted in this.
Yeah.
You don't hear the bass line up front. You don't even hear the guitar up front. Really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm like listening to this, like, this is a drum and harmonica song, and this is like the drums, they're being played as an instrument, and the bass is doing the keeping time. It's such a weird thing for me to listen to that, but I loved it. And that's just, this is so much of what the Beatles are. Is like, yeah, what formula? We're going to throw it all out and do something completely different. And this is what they did.
So this song did reach number one in the U.S. in 1964. Now, of course, was after I Want to Hold Your Hand hit number one. So,
and I'm surprised because it peaked at number 17 in the UK.
Yeah.
Because usually it's backwards. Usually it does better in the UK than it does in the US.
Well, that was quite a bit earlier, though. In the UK, it was their first single. So, I mean, to have your first single hit number 17 is pretty strong, really, if you think about it. And this is the one where you get into the drumming issues, right?
Yeah.
So the album version that we just listened to, that's actually Andy White, the session drummer. And you can tell the difference because you can hear the tambourine in it. And Ringo plays the tambourine. That had to piss him off. He's a new member of the band, but we're not going to let you drum on this song. But you can hear him. If you want to hear, the single that was released is actually Ringo's drumming.
Okay.
And you can catch that single on the Past Masters album of the Beatles that has all their singles. And the easy way to identify is no tambourine.
Oh.
And then on the Anthology 1 version was the original version they recorded with Pete Best. There's no tambourine, but you can tell the difference in drums. So if you have, you can go on Spotify or whatever and listen to those different versions. Listen to the album version, listen to the Anthology 1 version, and listen to the Past Masters version. So they're kind of interesting. I really kind of like the album version with Ringo on the tambourine. I think I just like the tambourine added.
Yeah.
But the drumming is stronger in the single version. It really is.
Yeah, Yoko Ono just came along too late.
Basically.
Yeah.
That's basically what happened. But, I mean, a lot of people consider Love Me Do to be kind of the Beatles, as it was their first single in the UK. Kind of the first big song, that obviously started setting them in place to go forward. So, we move on to the next song, P.S. I Love You.
Yeah, this is the Paul McCartney lovey-dovey song.
Yeah, so this is a Lennon and McCartney song, but, mainly McCartney's, and it's sang by McCartney. This song, I'd say it's got an excellent bass line in it. And it seems like when they're McCartney-driven songs, he definitely gets a little crazy on the bass, which is a good thing. And it's got excellent harmonies, once again, on the chorus. And it seems to be a theme throughout this album, Tyler, is the harmonies, and maybe I'm looking at this in retrospect, but to me the harmonies are what sets this whole album apart.
Because this is a different song. It's a different sounding song than the rest of the songs on the album. This is a love song. It's a real sweet, mellow love song. Yeah. And that harmony is so key to it.
Yeah, I mean, because we're going from Please Please Me to finish out the first side. We start out with Love Me Do, although it's very harmonica and drum driven. It's still a rocker.
It's a rock song and a very rhyming song.
Yeah, and then P.S. I Love You is like a complete turnaround. It's different, And so this was actually the B-side to Love Me Do. So kind of interesting they put those together. So on the U.S. albums, this was actually on Introducing the Beatles and the Early Beatles, and then they also released it on the compilation Love Songs in 1977.
As they should.
They should.
Yeah, this is definitely a love song.
Well, it says, P.S. I love you.
Yeah.
And funny enough, this was engineered and produced by Norman Smith because George Martin was out of the office that day. I don't know if it was with a tummy ache or what, but...
Well, that'll happen when you eat too many biscuits with your tea.
Exactly. So, not a bad song. It's a good album track. It's I've always enjoyed it just because it's a good play off of the other songs.
Yeah, but once again, this seems short. I'm sure it's not as short as it seems, but it just seems like it's over sooner than you expected.
Yeah, well, most of them are.
Yeah.
So we move on to Baby It's You.
Oh, the cheat song.
Yes. So, famously written by Burt Bacharach, who just passed recently. This is sang by John Lennon. This was also a hit for the Shirelles.
Yeah.
And the Beatles played this song live quite frequently in their early years, 61 to 63. It was a staple of their live set.
This seems like a Beatles type song.
It does. And
yeah, these guys like songs that hit a hard left midway through it. Because this is a classic love song, and then cheat.
Well, not only that, but Lennon's vocals almost reach a screaming point.
Yeah.
I really love Lennon's vocals and the strain. Sometimes I don't like strained vocals if they sound strained, like they can't get there.
Yeah.
But these sound like he's...
frustration, right?
Yeah.
It's belting it out of how he's feeling.
Yeah, I really like this song. If I was to pick between P.S. I Love You and Baby It's You, I really like this song.
Yeah, this is a great song.
And I'm mainly just sitting on the vocals. I think the vocal track is amazing on this. I think Lennon does an amazing job.
Yeah, like a song that's about how he's stuck in love with this girl even though he knows she's running around on him. Yeah, baby, it's you, you cheat.
Yeah, very strong song. And like I said, the vocals do it for me on this. This really showcases Lennon's vocals.
Oh, yeah, very talented singer in this one. And he really shines on this side of the album.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So we move on to the next song, Do You Want to Know a Secret? Another Lennon-McCartney composition, mainly written by Lennon, but funny enough, they decided to have George Harrison sing this song.
Yeah. And once again, George Harrison's voice to me just sounds like John Lennon with that cold again.
Yeah, he's kind of raspy in this, and it's kind of a weak vocal in my opinion. I mean, I'm a George Harrison. I'm a Beatles fan all the way around. I don't like to pick, my favorite Beatle all this. The Beatles are the Beatles, and I enjoy all of them, and I've always pulled for all of them. I enjoy all their solo work and things like that. But this kind of shows George's gap, I think, at first. I don't think he was very strong. And I think this song, I don't know how it would have turned out with Lennon or McCartney singing it, but this is probably a song, probably one of my least favorite songs on the album.
Okay.
It did reach number 2 in the U.S. in March of '64 when VJ released it as a single.
Oh.
And it was the most successful George Harrison song, funny enough, until the very end when he released, his beautiful song Something in 1969. I mean, so this was the most successful Harrison sang Beatles song until '69.
I can see that. It's a smooth, happy, melodic song.
And to me, I guess why this song, and maybe this is why Lennon and McCartney don't want to sing it, I think it's simple.
Yeah.
And I think in a way they might have been a tad bit embarrassed because they wrote it, but they didn't see it constructed in. It just wasn't a complex enough song to be theirs, so they decided to give it to little brother George. Here, you sing this.
Yeah.
So, probably one of my least favorite songs on the album, but it's not a skipper for me. I don't have many Beatles skippers.
Sure.
But, yeah, definitely not my favorite.
Yeah.
So we move on to the next song, A Taste of Honey, written by Bobby Scott and Rick Marlowe. This one's sang primarily by McCartney. This was another staple in their live set, 62, 63. They played quite often. It's a song that's been recorded by a lot of artists. Herb Alpert, The Hollies, Tom Jones, Tony Bennett, The Ventures, Chet Atkins, and more. A ton more that I can't even name.
This has been covered.
But it's a weird song. It really is. And I didn't used to like it, but I've come to like it just because it's strange.
Yeah.
But it shows the Beatles' diversity and how this is like they're doing rockers like I Saw Her Standing There, then A Taste of Honey. Mm-hmm. You're like, is this even the same band?
Taste of honey that's sweeter than wine. Well, yeah. Honey is sweeter than wine.
Yeah, it is.
It's got kind of a medieval sound to it, where it's kind of Old English.
Yeah, and it's slow, but
But once again, you have something very unusual that happens in this song, where it sounds like the guitar is the one keeping the beat, while the rest of the instruments play.
Yeah, it's an interesting song. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I didn't used to like it that well, but I've come to really enjoy it because it's just kind of weird.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit, but that's what makes it fit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the Beatles, I normally wouldn't use that with other bands, but the Beatles made a career on each album having each song was different, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. If we say that honey is that sweetness, or that's where the flavor of the Beatles is, that's exactly what this song is on the album. This is a taste of the Beatles that you're going to see as they mature into the band that they'll become. This is a taste of honey.
Yeah, it's a good song. Another cover, you know, as I was looking at this, they've got 1, 2... How many covers they got on here, Tyler?
Well, there's
1, 2, 3. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
4, 5, 6.
Okay.
So they got 6 out of the 14 covers, right? Which was quite common at the time.
Yeah.
But the one thing, you know, besides, you know, when you get to their 4th album, they didn't do a lot of covers here after this, you know, and that's one thing that kind of made them stand out from other bands, and so... But I think to fill this out, a lot of these were songs they were playing live and they knew them, and that kind of fits into if they were going to record this live, that kind of makes sense. It was their live set, you know?
Yeah.
So that moves us to the next song, There's a Place. Another Lennon-McCartney tune.
Yeah.
Basically penned by, you know, Lennon, but this song's got a lot of harmonica accents in it, and I really enjoy them. And I enjoy the harmonies on this one, too. This song, to me, with the harmonies between McCartney and Lennon and Harrison, is basically early Beatles to a T.
Yeah.
This song pretty much defines the early era to me.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy this song all the way through. And I don't feel like I should, but I do.
No, I noticed that this song has a very similar tune to the song Misery earlier in the album, and I liked it. I really like the song Misery and the melody that it has.
Yeah, this one's a little faster than
it is.
Misery, but yeah, similar. And you know, I don't know. I just really like the harmonic accents throughout it. I like the harmonies. This was released in, I think this was the B-side to Twist and Shout. This only hit number 74 in the U.S.
Oh.
So not very strong.
No, but that's pretty good for what this song is.
Yeah, I mean, Twist and Shout hit number 2 in the U.S., so
and
that's the A-side.
Yeah.
So then we move on to Twist and Shout to finish out the album. And
this is the theme of Beatlemania.
It kind of is. It's another cover written by Phil Medley and Burt Burns. Pretty popular hit. It had actually been popularized the year before by the Isley Brothers in 1962, and the Beatles version is most like the Isley Brothers.
Oh.
And one thing that's really well known for this song is it's kind of considered the best first one-take song of all time.
Really?
So they took it in one take. John Lennon had a severe cold at the time, was sicker than hell, and apparently they were slave drivers because they made him sing.
I am surprised that John's voice could handle this, because he really strains his voice in this one. I don't think he could have done more than
Twist
one
and Shout's been done by a number of artists, right?
Yeah.
It's been covered thousands of times. And the one thing I can say on this, you know, John Lennon's sick. The one thing I call out on this song is the vocal. This is an excellent vocal.
Yeah.
His vocal on this is above and beyond. I mean, he's straining, but it's in a perfect way. He's kind of got that gruffness. It's like perfect.
Yeah. This is a song for a performance.
Yeah, and it was. Speaking of performance, they did perform this on Ed Sullivan in '64. It was one of the songs they performed that really hooked the U.S. to the Beatles. So
yeah, real hard rock. This is something that the kids love to dance to, and they are gonna scream their heads off. And this is the song that made people lose their minds, I'm sure.
Well, and this is an excellent way to end an album. This is the way you end an album. Just like they started it with I Saw Her Standing There.
Yeah.
This is an excellent way to end it.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, boom, right?
Yeah.
And they did that later, too, with like Dizzy Miss Lizzie, and they ended albums. They had a good way of opening and ending albums, and maybe that's where it comes into play, that it was kind of the U.S. albums, even though some people are used to them, were kind of strange because they weren't how they meant them to be. You know, these song arrangements and, more importantly, the song order was done on purpose.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you change those albums up, it gives a whole different feeling to it.
Way to go, Capitol Records.
But 60th anniversary, you know, I think, to me, for a long time, I didn't think the early Beatles, the first couple albums, held up very well. But I think they hold up better now, for me personally, than they did 10 years ago. 20 years ago, whatever you want to say it. I love this album. I find myself referring back to the early Beatles albums more often now than I did when I was younger.
I can see that.
Yeah, and it's, you know, but that's what's so good about them is you know, they're together such a short amount of time as far as producing albums, 7 years basically, and they did all these albums, but it's not so many how many albums, it's where they went from point A to point B to the end. The music's so different. They innovated so many things, and
it's almost like watching the Beatles from the early albums to the late albums. The early albums, every once in a while you see this sprout from the seed, and the sprout looks like every other sprout in the garden. But as you get to the later albums, you start to see that the sprout has bloomed into something that's not like anything else in the garden.
I'm going to be honest with you. I've never heard anybody compare the Beatles to a garden, but
I just did.
I know you did, and that's fine. I'll keep that reference in the
how
back
about
of my
plant
mind.
in a garden? How about
that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Because what these guys are is they're a sunflower that's growing amongst the corn.
So you knew a few songs off this album, right?
Oh yeah.
So what is your take, and what is your rating of the album overall?
Excellent album. I think it was compiled very well. Like I said, the Beatles have this style about them that refuses to go with the grain. So while a lot of these songs sound a lot like the rock and roll of the period of the early 60s, they throw a couple curves at you. And just to let you know that, no, we're not just another band of rock and roll era. We are innovators, and we're here to change things up.
Well, and that's what they did with every album. You know, it was they were one step or 10 steps ahead of everyone else. So, you know, and the Beatles it's a very... it can be a very interesting topic because most people either love them or hate them, right?
Yeah.
And love them or hate them, you cannot deny the impact they've had on other artists and the music industry as a whole. There's no doubt about that.
Exactly.
But, you know, but they can be, you know, it can be a very good discussion between people.
For sure.
I mean, they're polarizing in one way or the other, certainly. But I rate the album without a doubt because of its content, the time frame it was released in, and its impact, a 10 out of 10.
Okay.
What would you rate it?
I was thinking more along the lines of 4. No.
Hey, you can't offend me.
I know I can't offend you, but I would definitely offend a lot of listeners out there if I said that and meant it. No, I really like this album. I'm going to give it an 8. Mostly because I'm just not a huge Beatles fan, and this isn't some of my favorite Beatles music.
Most Beatles fans, especially coming in, like the later stuff.
Yeah.
It's more relatable. It held up a little better.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of criticism that I have for this album or things that I don't like about it.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm not your biggest Beatles fan out there, and therefore I give it an 8.
We're going to get you there. We'll get you there soon.
Well, you're already up at an 8. I mean, you're going to get me to a 10? You probably will.
Maybe so, maybe not.
I could be. I could get to a 10 on the Beatles.
Well, that's our review of the Beatles' debut album, Please Please Me, debut UK album, Please Please Me, on the 60th anniversary of its release. So
happy anniversary to the Beatles. Both of them, they're still with us.
Exactly. So go give it a listen. Tell us what you think, and you can send us your questions, your comments, your review requests at classicvinylpodcast@gmail.com. You reach out to us at Classic Vinyl Podcast on Instagram if you'd like. We're at Classic Vinyl Pod on Twitter. And,
I wonder if Sir Paul McCartney or Sir Ringo Starr would give I'm sure they're both knighted. That's why I say it that way. I wonder if they would reach out to us on Twitter and tell us what they think about it.
what they think of their album.
Wouldn't that be fun?
They probably don't even recall it.
I think they should.
They should. But once again, thanks for listening to us. Go give us a follow and a like, and we appreciate anything you can do.
Because I'll say, John Lennon, he would send us a tweet.
If he was around, he would.
If he was, yeah.
Until next time, see ya.
Thank you so much for listening to Classic Vinyl Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Classic Vinyl Podcast for updates, and also share us with your music-loving friends.